Welcome everybody to the public board meeting of NHS England. Can I, first of all, just note the apologies for absence that we've received. A number of our colleagues who are with us this morning in the private board, who the board will know were dialing in to the meeting, or unable to dial into this meeting, is simply given the logistics. But we've received apologies for this afternoon's meeting from David Bean and Jeremy Townsend, from Wal Collada, Simon Wesley, Jackie Rock and Helen Stokes-Lampard. Are there any declarations of interest that members of the board need to declare now that are new since your last registration? Thank you. And can I take the board's support and approval of the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of March? Yes. Thank you very much. Let me just give make a few comments just as chair at the start of this meeting on some sort of organisational matters. First of all, and we commented this morning, and David's not here. David Bean, as we know, has been appointed as the chair for King's College Hospital Foundation Trust, and that appointment, plus actually that in normal time flow in terms of directors' terms of office, we are now launching and are about to launch a recruitment programme, probably looking to recruit 2 or 3 new non-executive directors. The process as a public sector appointment process does tend to take some time, so we're just launching that programme now, or that process now, in anticipation that it may take several months, and therefore we do need to start now, essentially to ensure the board maintains the right skill set and mix of skills as we see colleagues stepping away. In terms of appointments, we have actually made a very recent new appointment as Chair of Cyber Security for NHS England. So, as you'll know, John Noble is stepping down again in June or July, and we've appointed Jamie Saunders to take over from him, and he is now in the process of his induction, and that I think is a very good appointment, although we'll be sorry to see John Noble leave us. And can I just welcome Suresh Viswanathan to your first public board. In terms of meetings and engagements that I've had since the last board, let me just share just a few of those with you. In terms of meetings, we had a very good series of calls with ICB chairs, and there's a particular group of ICB chairs and trust chairs who act as a sort of an advisory group to me. We had a very good discussion yesterday, and that was actually thinking about strategic communications and how we think about the messaging of the NHS England's strategy as we go forward over the next months and year. In the area of innovation and life sciences, I've had a couple of meetings actually with the Tony Blair Institute, and I know other colleagues have also done that, and that's on topics of primary care transformation, and also on data, and that's been a really, really helpful engagement. I also had a very good session with Lord James O'Shaughnessy, and that again on innovation and clinical trials in particular was a good engagement. On Monday, I attended as a board member the Genomics England Limited strategy board, and it was an all-day event. There is a very good working relationship between NHS England and Genomics England Limited, and as we collaborate well and work well together, actually, one can see really good strategic momentum in the work that Genomics England is doing, where we are mutually supportive to each other. And with Sue Hill, who leads for us here as the executive, that relationship, she working with the newly appointed CEO of Genomics England, Rich Scott, is proving ever more fruitful. And then we also had, about 3 weeks ago, we had the Genomics England broader board meeting, and that does include Genomics England Limited as one of its constituent members, but also captures our own we have 7 genomics labs around the NHS, and the NHS does about 90% of the genomics testing actually that's done across the health system, and Genomics England with its whole genome sequencing does around 8% of it. So actually we gather the broader operations of genomics together, and we make sure that we are coordinated. And we had, again, a very good forward-looking board meeting. And then lastly, I had the great pleasure of attending a life sciences industry dinner, actually, which was, one, a very good dinner, and two, actually some very interesting people, and a good conversation, and Vin joined me there. In terms of meetings with public bodies, if I describe them as that, with Amanda, a very good meeting with Jane Chidgey-Clark, so the National Guardian's Office, separately a meeting with the Chief Executive of the National Audit Office, again, a very good discussion. I've had a chair-to-chair meeting with the NHS Business Service Authority, and also a chair-to-chair meeting with CQC. And then with patient groups, meetings with Cancer Research UK with Michelle Mitchell, which was very good, and also with the UK Sepsis Trust. And then I attended for NHS England and with Chris Hobson. We both attended the Health ALB's senior leaders meeting, actually hosted by the DHSC. In terms of other meetings, if I just choose a meeting with Lord Markham, in the department, actually, there's a very regular meeting where we review the NHS app and the increase in its functionality and the plans and the development of the NHS app. And so I now attend those, and they're virtually on a weekly basis. And again, Vin is often also at those meetings. And then separately on the new hospitals programme, led here for NHS England by Julian. Again, a good exchange with Lord Markham and the team both from the Department of Health and also from within NHS England. And then in terms of visits, again, I made this comment this morning, they are quite close to us physically, the London Ambulance Service. So again, they had the pleasure of my company. Perhaps that's not quite the right description. But I went again to see the London Ambulance Service, actually see the Tactical Operations Centre, and that was really, really helpful to me and instructive. A number of events. I made a keynote speech at the London Business School with Chris Hobson. We hosted a breakfast roundtable on productivity. Again, I did a keynote speech at the Pharmacy Clinical Leadership event, and also for the CCOL Group AGM. If I stop giving you my diary and reflect instead on today's meeting, I think we've got a really very good set of agenda items, some really important discussion points. So as well as hearing from Amanda and then from Emily and from Julian on the CEO's update and operational performance and on financial performance, we are going to have a conversation about productivity, which I think is really good. We're going to have an update on the delivery of the first year of the maternity and neonatal 3-year delivery plan, and reflect more broadly, I think, upon maternity. We're going to have a conversation, an agenda item here on research in the NHS, a truly important constituent of what the NHS does. And then we're also going to reflect on a point of closure, which is actually we're closing an oversight committee attaching to what's called the new NHS England programme. And I'll talk a little bit more just about that in a moment. So the agenda today is probably going to be at something of a gallop. It's quite a full agenda, but it's also a meaty agenda, I think, in the topics covered. If I just reflect back on productivity for a moment and how we should be able to deliver more for patients, I just want to reflect on some recent sort of current performance that we should just reflect on how much NHS staff are delivering in the here and now, and remind everybody that we're clearly not standing still, and that improvements are constantly being made. The most recent monthly data, and Emily, I'm sure, will draw some of this out and better than I will, but the most recent monthly data shows that for the second month in a row, we've met the faster diagnosis standard. 77% of people getting all clear or a definitive diagnosis within 4 weeks. That's almost 200,000 people in a month. And an earlier diagnosis, as we all know, is truly important, as the sooner we're able to catch the cancer, then it's easier to treat. GP appointments. there were absolute record levels. In February, there were 30 million GP appointments, and that compares with 24 million appointments in the same month pre-pandemic, a 23% increase in the number of appointments that GPs are offering to patients. And on elective activity over the past year, so from April to 23 to March 24, almost 17.5 million appointments and procedures were delivered. And that was up by almost 250,000 on the 12 months pre the pandemic. And whilst we know that there's still much to do, and particularly on urgent and emergency care, and that there is significant pressure, last year for our A&E performance did improve for the first time outside of the pandemic. And we'll be publishing some new analysis today, just touching on a range of things, but one of the things that we'll touch on is actually the impact of virtual wards. And virtual wards, where we have nearly 12,000 of them. I remember when that target was set and we thought, can we get to 10,000 virtual wards? And I think we got to 11,717, something like that. And so we beat the target, and we were sceptical that we'd hit the target. And now as we look into this next year, we know that we're going to work really hard to improve the occupancy levels in those virtual wards. But in the southeast alone, in the past year, 9,000 hospital admissions were avoided because of what is a world-leading initiative, which is these virtual ward beds. And that's very good news for the patients, who can be treated from the comfort of their own homes, but it also helps alleviate, clearly, their conditions. And it's one example of how technology can improve productivity. And we know that there are many, many ways that we can transform care for patients for the better. Staying on that technology point, and I referenced the meetings with Lord Markham and with Vin on the NHS app, it's one of the big bets that we're making right now, and that's the increasing functionality being applied through the NHS app. And it really is, if we think what it might, how it might continue to develop. When we look back in 5 years' time, I think it'll be one of the things where people say that was absolutely transformational for the way society engages with the health service. But it also brings a cost-saving benefit. And over the last financial year, over 22 million messages actually were sent to patients through the NHS app. And they might otherwise have been sent as a letter or perhaps a text message. And that's a saving of over £1 million. So I often use this phrase that we can't be Pollyanna-ish, and we know that we suffer very real pressures from ongoing strong growth in demand. But I think it's important to recognise that through the hard work and the efforts of our workforce, actually, that the NHS today is providing absolutely record levels of healthcare. So we provide record levels of healthcare through the very good work of our workforce, and I know we've got lots more to do, and we need to keep up with growing demand. One of the other items we're going to talk about outside productivity, by the way, that long narrative was a link to productivity, but is actually what's called here the Change Programme. That's this new NHS England committee. And I would just like to start this meeting by thanking everybody involved in what has been a very important piece of work over the last 2 years. So to Steve Russell for the executives, thank you, but also Amanda for your leadership and engagement in it. And he's not here, but to Wal Collada, who led and chaired the Oversight Committee of this piece of work. It hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been straightforward, but it is one of the largest public sector transformations in this country, and the restructure of NHS England, absorbing NHS Improvement, NHS Digital, X, and HEE, has created a new organisation, still expert, but over a third smaller. And I'd also like to thank not just Warren and Steve and Amanda, but all these senior executives, because actually the stress on you as you manage this merger and this reshaping of the organisation was continuing to provide the role that you do provide into the NHS system. Thank you for that. And I should also thank actually clearly all of our staff for the way they've engaged with what has been a very demanding programme, with often actually real personal challenge to individuals amongst them. You know, we have reduced our headcount by over a third. And in doing that, actually, we'll shift funding to the front line, and we'll reduce bureaucracy, and we'll still retain that head office expertise. So it's been a really important initiative, and actually today we mark the closure of that Oversight committee, and now we need to make sure we continue to run the new model very effectively. I do need, I think, just to comment, Amanda, very briefly on maternity. We have the topic coming up today. About a month ago, 3 weeks or a month ago, the board had a deep dive board call discussion and narrative and a discussion around maternity. But we've all seen the distressing testimonies from patients who experienced maternity care that was simply not good enough, and not what the NHS wants or expects for patients. And we're working with local leaders at all trusts to build and nurture a culture where women are listened to and their choices are respected, and that care is personable and equitable and safe. We're now a year into our 3-year maternity delivery plans. We're going to get an update from Ruth, and it does feel to all of us, I think, we had that conversation, say, 3 or 4 weeks ago, that it's the right time again to take stock of progress and where we need to go further, faster. But this work also reiterates the importance of listening, and also our freedom to speak up responsibilities, but certainly the importance of listening. And it's incumbent on us as members of the NHS England board to listen to patients and to listen to staff who raise concerns, but not just to listen, but then to act. Which is why, you know, we are updating our speaking up policies. It's why actually we as leaders should send the right tone from the top in an area of great importance. It's sort of an intangible cultural cement about the way an organisation should behave and the way it should signal. But going back to where that theme started, the maternity conversation today is a really important conversation, and I look forward to that. So let me finish there, Amanda. I've gone on for longer than I thought, so I apologise. I may have made some comments that you might have been going to make, but can I hand over to you for the Chief Executive's report?
Yeah, of course, Richard, thank you. And some of the things I want to say do overlap, but that's sort of as it should be, because these, I think, are the big issues that we've been working on and are thinking about today. So first thing I wanted to do was just update colleagues on planning for 24-25. Again, we're going to touch on that more in the course of today's meeting. Colleagues will remember that we were able to start the planning round with the publication of the priorities and operational planning guidance just before the last board. That was the 27th of March. And the focus of planning guidance this year was really about continued improvement on recovery, just as Richard has said, focusing on delivering the long-term workforce plan, and that includes, of course, a really important focus on looking after our staff and also a focus on building for the future. So as we did last year, we've started meeting with the ICBs and providers in each system to discuss their draft plans. So far, I think we have covered 20 systems, and that's been in the Midlands, the South West, London, and a couple in the South East. I suspect Emily and Julia may well want to add their reflections from those visits, but I have to say mine would be that whilst it is clearly really challenging, I have been really impressed by how hard colleagues are working to ensure that we do have robust plans for the year ahead, whilst also getting on with delivery now. Talking about planning and some of the unknowns, certainly we have had a year where one of the unknowns that we had to deal with was around industrial action. So I thought it was just worth taking a moment to welcome the news last night that the Government and Junior Doctors Committee are taking forward independently mediated talks. I know we all hope that this does take, everybody a step further towards a settlement which allows the NHS to have a clear run at recovery in the year ahead. On the less welcome side, while we have been meeting today as a board, the GPC has announced that it is balloting GP contract holders on a form of collective action, although we won't see the result of that until the end of July at the earliest. Richard, you've just spent a moment talking about productivity and also technology. So I just wanted, again, to pick up on that, because that has been another really big focus for the last few weeks, because we've been working on taking forward the planning work to determine now how we make the most of the capital made available through the spring budget, which includes a big investment in technology starting from next year. So we had a really good and I have to say very energising and thoughtful discussion with ICB and Trust Chief Executives earlier this month, which was particularly focused on productivity as a theme for the whole day. That included technology, but it also included how we embrace the opportunity that NHS Impact offers to embed continuous improvement as the way that we deliver operational and clinical excellence. And we'll discuss all of that more, Julian, when we come to your paper later on. Colleagues will also remember that at the last public board we discussed ADHD and the intention to create a new cross-sector task force to gain a better understanding of the challenges affecting those with ADHD and what we can collectively do in response, really recognising it was a much broader issue than just the NHS. So I'm really pleased that we have now appointed the co-chairs of that task force, Professor Anita Thapar, a child psychiatrist and clinician scientist, and she is an advisor to the Welsh Government on these issues, and Joanna Killian, who's the Chief Executive of the Local Government Association, and that obviously importantly recognising the crucial role that local councils play. So just want to note my thanks, and no doubt our thanks to them for taking on this incredibly important work. You've mentioned it already, Richard, but as we'll discuss later, the last stages of creating the new NHS England has occupied a lot of colleagues' time over the past few weeks, and I would also like to add my thanks to yours, Richard, and thank Steve in particular, Wal, but also all of the other colleagues who have played such an important part in this very complex programme of work. We're going to talk about it in detail later, but I think it's worth saying that whilst, and you've said it, but I want to add to it, while the benefits of the programme are significant and are going to be significant, I really do want to just acknowledge the impact that that has had on staff within NHS England, and to note my thanks for how committed so many people have been to doing really good work despite that disruption. We know now the big challenge for us is to focus on how, as a single streamlined organisation, we really do best deliver on our responsibilities to the wider NHS, to patients and to the public, and that is our opportunity now. A few more things from me. I've just got three more, if that's all right. Bit of a just three things I wanted to talk about, all timely. The first relates to delivery of the long-term workforce plan. We have said in our planning guidance, I've already mentioned, that that is an absolutely key priority for us in the year ahead, and that one of the things that we're particularly focused on is looking after our staff, so that is the retention part of the plan, alongside, of course, reform and train. So in that spirit, we have just recently published a letter to the NHS on improving the working lives of doctors in training. I'm sure colleagues saw that. And that was really recognising that there are some very specific things that affect doctors in training which are different to the things that affect the rest of our staff, particularly to do with the rotational nature of training. But we also, we can never forget the needs of all of our other staff, were able to announce yesterday a partnership with NHS Charities Together, which is, again, a new partnership with match funding from us to enable colleagues to work with staff to understand what those additional sort of smaller things are that we know really do make a difference to how people feel about their working environment and their working lives. So that was just another important step in delivering on our commitments. I just wanted to say as well, though, that we did hear a very clear message from doctors a few weeks ago on the importance of health and wellbeing support, in particular psychological support. So as we said we would in the long-term workforce plan, we are working to finalise terms of review to make sure that all staff, not just doctors, all staff get the support they need on the psychological side as well as more widely. But we do know we got it wrong on the practitioner health contract, and that is why we said sorry, and that is why we took urgent action with their support to make sure that that contract could continue. Richard, you've talked about maternity. I just wanted to add my voice to that. And again, I know colleagues are going to talk about it in more detail later. And it is timely that we've got a paper today on progress against our 3-year delivery plan, which is about improving quality and safety in maternity and neonatal care across England. And it's timely because of what you said, which is that we have just seen on Monday the publication of the APPG report on birth trauma. And that did contain some really powerful testimonies from women and families who have had a bad experience of services previously. And whilst it is difficult reading, I know colleagues will have done so and will have taken the time to read the report, as I have. Much of what that report says does the recommendations do chime strongly with what we know we need to do and what is in the plan already, things like perinatal mental health services, pelvic health services, GP checks, and we have seen progress on them. We will talk about that later. But just to say, Richard, you're so right when you say we know there is still so much more to do and so much work ahead. A very strong theme of the report was that women didn't feel listened to, and they didn't feel that they were always shown kindness and compassion, and that is a theme we have heard before, and it's a focus of our 3-year delivery plan too. The APPG suggestion for a cross-government, and that means not just NHS England and not just the NHS, but a genuinely cross-government strategy on maternity is something that I and the Secretary of State absolutely support. We really welcome that, and we will be taking that forward. So final thing to end on a positive. I just want to, because we don't always talk about this, but I thought it was worth just saying, I really want to congratulate the Greener NHS team for the support that they have been giving to NHS organisations to access the public sector decarbonisation scheme. 200 million has been announced this week for 20 trusts to support energy and cost-saving efforts. And what that means is more money for frontline care, less spend on overheads, and that takes the total investment awarded to the NHS through PSDS to over £1 billion across over 100 projects. So that is a real achievement, and that is thanks to our having a clear vision and a proven ability to deliver capital improvements when we get the right support. So thanks to them.
Thank you, Amanda. I won't at this stage ask colleagues if they want to react to anything I said or Amanda said, but we'll pause after Emily and then Julian have done the operational performance update and then Julian the financial update. That's okay. So Emily, to you first.
Thank you. And I should add that Sarah Jane will also give an update on the year 2 of the UEEC plan briefly.
Yes,
as
good
part
point.
of my update, Chair. So I said at the last public board that I thought the story of the last of this winter was effectively an extraordinary effort from staff across the NHS to deliver some really challenging targets, and still a long way to go in terms of delivering exactly as we would hope every day. And I think that will be the theme today as well. Some absolutely brilliant improvements that I want to mention, and equally lots of ambition for this year in terms of how we can continue to improve. And just to take the theme that Amanda started of reflections on the ICB planning meetings that we've been doing, we've done 20 out of 42 so far. I think that's been reflected in those meetings where we've set some extremely challenging targets in the planning guidance, and we've had some very, I was about to say robust, but I think that word can be overused, but well, I'll say it because I can't think of what the word is now, but some robust discussions which makes it clear that the plans that have been submitted have been really well thought through. There are not sort of ambitious, unrealistic plans on those pages. There are plans that have been thought through very carefully to make the most of our resources to deliver for patients every day, and some brilliant examples of system working to make sure we can keep on meeting these really stretching targets. That doesn't mean we will be exactly always where we want to be, but I'm incredibly encouraged by those efforts and by the analysis that's underpinning them. I'll come back to UEC at the end because I'm going to hand over to Sarah Jane for some of that. But if I just talk briefly about elective, which obviously is a huge focus in terms of bringing down long waits and making sure we can treat patients as speedily as possible. I'll refer to the March published figures, which were in the Superstats that were published last week. And what we saw in March 24 compared to February 24 was that the total waiting list decreased very marginally by 0.01%, 916 people, and stood at the end of March at 7.54 million. 104-week waits decreased by 7.94%. 78-week waits decreased significantly by 52%. And is now at the lowest was at the end of March, the lowest since reporting started in April 21 against this particular metric. 65-week waits also decreased significantly by 34.71%, and at the end of March were 48.15% lower than in March 2023. So there's been a tremendous effort through the year, despite industrial action and definite hits to capacity, to do the right thing and bring those long waits down. The 52-week waiting list, however, shows that we still have plenty to do, and that was the only long wait metric that increased in March compared to February. It increased by 1.39% to 309,300. I wanted to dwell a bit on the cancer targets, because I think that's been an extraordinary example of setting extremely ambitious targets, and the whole system pulling together to improve. So with clinical leadership, we've done everything from increasing capacity through complete pathway redesign to creative use of capacity across weekends and evening sessions, and that the building of additional capacity. And we've seen that in the results, in that we met the 28-day faster diagnosis target for cancer in both February and March for the first time since the standard was introduced in 2021. And perhaps most importantly, that improvement was universal across the country rather than concentrated in a small number of areas. So every region met the target in both months, and national performance has been consistently running at 2 to 4% above the same month last year for 10 months now. And Richard's already given the number about how many more patients have therefore had their diagnosis within 28 years. We also showed at the end of March that patients who've been waiting longer than 62 days, otherwise known as the 62-day backlog, ended the year at 14,916, which is the lowest it's been since April 2020, a 20,000 reduction on the peak of the backlog in September 22, and therefore a full recovery from the expansion of the waiting list over the course of the pandemic. And as with FDS, every single region met their population-adjusted target. Given where we started the year, which was a 40% gap between the best and worst, and we've reduced that to a 22% gap, this is huge progress, in particular in meeting the challenge of variation. And the number of systems that reached the ambition increased from 16 out of 42 at the beginning of the year to 35 out of 42 at the end of the year. The maximum distance any individual system has been from the target reduced from 100% to just 12%. This means that the NHS has met both headline performance expectations for cancer in 23-24 and puts us in a strong position to make further improvements back towards constitutional standards as we move into 24-25. Given the relatively strong performance for the faster diagnosis standard, we're confident that we'll continue to meet those targets through the year. We expect 62-day performance to be the key operational focus in the coming year. So if we look at it like this, 68.7% of people treated began their first definitive treatment for cancer within 62 days of an urgent suspected cancer referral, breast symptomatic referral, urgent screening referral, or consultant upgrade. That's 1.2 points up from last year and the highest it's been since April 22, but there is clearly more to do, and that will be our focus over the next 10 months. The planning guidance sets a clear expectation that performance will reach 70% nationally by March 2025. having met with the 20 out of 42 ICSs, as I mentioned so far, as part of the planning process, I know that some systems also plan to exceed that, and they can see how they can do that within their existing or the new planned capacity. And obviously, I'm keen to encourage that. A couple of quick headlines on diagnostics and mental health. So the published statistics show we're continuing to deliver high level of activity, 113% of pre-pandemic levels in March, and each month in 23-24 has seen higher activity than the same month in any previous year. Although I want to acknowledge on my point that there's a long way to go on some of these, partly due to growth in demand. There's still need for ongoing improvement and efficiency and use of capacity. As in March, we still had 21.8% of patients who'd waited more than 6 weeks, which obviously is not what we would want. In terms of mental health, I wanted to call out the improvement in the dementia diagnosis rate, which was at 64.8% at March 24, against the national ambition of 66.7%, and has shown steady improvement since January 23. And we've asked for that to be a continued focus this year. And recognising that across all of our mental health targets, there's extremely high demand, which is reflected in the fact that out-of-area placements, where our ambition would be 0, also remains high at this point. An indication of that volume is children and young people accessing services is continuing to increase, with 780,963 accessing services in the 12 months to February 24. So plenty to do to keep on improving. If I talk about UEEC performance, where we have the April numbers that have been published, we've seen pressure remain high on UEEC, with ED attendances 9.9% higher in April 24 than in 2023 in the same month, and ambulance services answering 3% more calls. Emergency admissions also continued to rise, with April 10.9% above April 23. We did, however, see a further improvement in 4-hour performance, up 0.2% to 74.4%, but acknowledging that is down from 74.6% in April 23. There was also an improvement in CAT2 performance, which was down to 30 minutes in April, which is almost 4 minutes improvement from March, but above the 28 minutes and 33 seconds in April 23. We've really seen quite a different April this year. One of our priorities for this year are the challenges with the number of patients who are waiting 12 hours or more to be admitted, transferred or discharged. And in April, we saw 58% more 12-hour delays than April 23. Our planning guidance has set out in detail how we'll work with systems to reduce the proportion of long waits in A&E, as well as improve across all of these metrics, and continuing the support and the joint working across the system that's seen such tremendous improvements in the last year. And Sarah Jane, tell us about what you've laid out in the plan.
Thanks, Emily. So the letter that we have shared today is really about how we can build on the learning that we've got from 23-24. The UEEC recovery plan was clearly a 2-year document, and it's really important that the plan is the plan. We still believe in the content of that, and that is absolutely the right things to do. But we've learned a lot along the way. We really wanted to have the main emphasis was to share that learning and help and support systems with the next part of the journey of improvement. So just in terms of just the high level points, I'm sure colleagues would have read the letter and supporting plans. So we have made a lot of progress. It's really important that we continue on that trajectory. Our targets for this year are the CAT2 response time is the same standard as it was last year, but obviously we were some way 6 minutes adrift of meeting it, so absolutely recommitment to achieving that target. And then we've got the further stretch target on the A&E 4 hours to 78%. So we're just making it really clear in the letter that that's what we are committed to doing. In terms of the 3 areas for priority, the first is to maintain the capacity that we put in 23-24. We know that made a huge difference over the winter period, not just in terms of the general acute beds, but also the virtual wards chair that you mentioned earlier, the additional ambulance hours on the road, the money that went into discharge in particular. So it's really important that we maintain that. But we've got to make the best use of all of our capacity as well. We know that some of the ways of working, the way that capacity is joined up, the way that some of our processes work between and inside organisations can allow us to use every bit of that more effectively. So things like a focus on length of stay is really important going into this year. And then the third priority area is about what more we can do to really have a focus on patients in the community to avoid them being brought to hospital and potentially being admitted due to a lack of alternatives. It's really obvious that some of our patients who stay in hospital for long periods of time, we could have put alternatives in the community before patients arrived. So we're sharing today our evidence about what works in each of those areas, and we've got some fantastic case studies around the country that we would encourage people to look at. Obviously, we're not doing this on our own. It's really important we are doing it in conjunction with our colleagues in local government, and there's quite a lot of sharing of best practice examples about work between health and social care, particularly around transfer of care and discharge. It's not just a what piece of correspondence, it's also quite a lot in there around how. So we've learned a lot around delivery support this year, the impact of our improvement offers and tiering, and we're setting out today what more we will do to help and support systems, taking the best of what we know works with our clinical teams on the ground. We're also committing to continue to measure those things that matter, not necessarily the things that we have always measured. So things like our discharge delay data, really looking at that granularity now of discharge ready date and the time it takes for people to leave hospital once they're ready to leave. Also committing again to the importance of the 12-hour standard and the measurement and publication of that data. And then finally, we are releasing much earlier this year the details of our capital incentive scheme. We know that organisations are focused on this anyway, but I think we were able to demonstrate last year that we can use it to corral our clinical teams and our systems to think about what further improvements that they can make to in turn get some capital support that can help to reinvest in services. So we've changed our approach slightly this year in a couple of ways. The first of that is it's more expansive, so we've included category 2 response times and the 12 hours as part of that, which I think is important, listening to people's feedback from last year. We've also made it more inclusive in that aspects of the incentive are system-based rather than individual provider-based, listening to what some of our colleagues have fed back, particularly in community and mental health services. And then finally, the measurement period for part of the incentive is over a longer period of time. What we're really encouraging everyone to do, and I know it's easy said and it's really challenging to do, but we need to make as much improvement as we possibly can again over the spring and summer period. Now we know that winter's a really difficult time to do that, so it's really encouraging everybody to think about those steps and key milestones along the way. So we've worked extensively with stakeholders. I'm really confident that there won't be anything in there that's a surprise. The only differences really are in points of emphasis and focus, but the plan was the plan last year. We demonstrated we could make it work together collectively last year, and I'm confident we can do that again as we go into this year. Thanks, Emily, and thank you, Chair.
Emily, thank you. So, Jane, thank you. I'm, as I say, going to move on. June, do you want to pick up on the financial performance update, and then we'll pause and see if colleagues have any reactions to any of the reports so far.
I really won't say much. I think it's in the paper. For 23-24, we will have underspent the revenue NHSE mandate by £30 million, so a fraction of a decimal point. I mean, it shows both how hard people have worked. This will be the second year in which we have spent less in real terms on like-for-like basis, whilst we have continued to actually deliver the improvements that Emily has just talked through. The only other thing to raise is just a flag is that on capital as well, for the money we deploy to the NHS, we underspent by £4 million on a £7.3 billion budget. So when the money is given, the NHS do really use it to good effect. The one area we did underspend was about £100 million on a ring-fence budget we are given by HM Treasury, which is used basically to cover the cost of the change to IFRS 16 and capitalising leases. And I would just say that is one of the areas where actually both forecasting is really hard. Yeah, it is. So, you know, I think the NHS overall have done a good job of living within the money in aggregate.
Thank you. So should we just pause for a moment to see if any colleagues have any reactions to... Julian, you gave us a very good report actually this morning as well on the private board. But any reactions on the operational performance report or update, or Amanda's comments? Andrew, your hand's gone up.
Thank you. So I've been on this board for a number of years, and this month's report is probably the best we've seen in terms of the turnaround that you guys are delivering in performance. And, you know, on cancer, it's a remarkable story considering where we were a couple of years ago. So, you know, well done for all the efforts that you put into this, because it is really fantastic and it is making a big difference to people's lives and experience of the NHS. So I'm heartened by what's happening here. I suppose the big challenge going forward is around keeping up the momentum and coming up with ideas and proposals that the whole kind of NHS will adopt. So I've still got concerns about 12 hours, for example, and how we've managed to manage the front door much better. And Cat 2 performance is a reflection of that. But once you're in a hospital, can you be sorted relatively quickly and then discharged as quickly as possible? And I think that's the next big challenge for us as we approach the coming winter. So I'm really heartened to hear your plans going forward, Sarah Jane, about how we can really address this. But it's just trying to win hearts and minds within systems, because I think it does require a system approach. Yeah. It can't be just down to the acute provider to discharge people. And I'd be interested to know at a future meeting all the thoughts that systems have come back with on how we can actually get hold of that metric and really improve it. Because you go back a decade, chief execs used to get dismissed on the basis of 12-hour performance, and clearly we don't want to be in that kind of territory. But it is a marker of experience, patient experience, and I think it's a really important thing to tackle.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the executives for the report. Just wanted to note with interest the very encouraging data in the operational performance report. Perhaps doesn't attract quite so many headlines as some of the things Emily mentioned in detail, but paragraphs 24 and 5, the work around the diabetes prevention programme and the path to remission programme, I thought the results were hugely encouraging. I just wondered if somebody wanted to comment a bit further on those, and also if plans to expand referrals into those programmes were very much sort of on the radar going forward.
Emily, do you want to pick that one up? Or?
Shall I do one and then the other?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on Andrew's points. First of all, thank you. But I was going to reflect particularly what you said about cancer quickly, in that I think all of the recovery programmes have demonstrated tremendous working with the system in order to get stuff done. And I wanted to call 3 things out in particular. I think fits all of them, but particularly reflecting on the cancer one we've focused on today. The first is the combination of clinical and operational leadership together. So the policies, the approaches, the solutions, the working with the system has very much recognised that we can't do one without the other. And so the leadership of the cancer programme of Ed Rose on the operational side and Callie Palmer and Peter Johnson as the National Clinical Director means that everything is being done from that perspective, and the same in the UEEC programme and the elective programme, and in primary care as well. The second is about doing things with, not to, the system. And I think all of the programmes have been absolutely rigorous at even the way the tiering system could have worked, which would have been sort of directive, and NHS England tells you you've got to do this. That is not how it's been experienced in terms of the feedback that I've heard. Recognising that we can look across all of the systems and say, we think this is the approach that demonstrably is more effective, but what that looks like when it's implemented in any individual system will look somewhat different, and systems need to have that ability to influence and own those solutions. And the third is making the investment where it's needed. There are places where we just didn't have the capacity, we didn't have the space, we didn't have the staff in order to deliver, and the combination of those things in concert, using the creative problem solving and the improvement techniques that we're going to talk about later, I think has been really impressive. And obviously partly wanted to mention it, as I said in the private board, in that it's Ed Rose's last day was yesterday, and we've all benefited from the 3 years he spent leading the cancer programme, and want to recognise that and say good luck and please come back. Not that we don't have lots of other brilliant people as well, but Ed has been particularly brilliant. On the diabetes point, so thank you for calling that out. And I think one of the things that we spoke about earlier is how important the evaluation of this has been. And what we found looking across all of our initiatives is that we are better in evaluation in some places than others, because we want to make sure what we're doing is robust. But we are much better off when we can look at particularly something like diabetes, where we need to look at long-term health outcomes, having designed the evaluation up front, embedded it in the way the programme's working, so that we can come back and say, no, this is much better for patients and genuinely good value for money at the same time. So we are, excited at the opportunity to extend that now that the evaluation has come back so positively. The statistic in paragraph 25 that in around 50% of cases, the type 2 diabetes was in remission at the end of the experience is, as you say, very exciting. And it speaks to the conversations we've been having internally on the medium-term strategy more broadly about how do we create the right balance between fixing things we can see right in front of us operationally and the need to make sure we're building in, strategic investment in prevention in particular.
Thank you. Any other, Mark?
It's an extraordinary financial tour de force to come in on a 1 billion budget with 30 million under. But of course, as you point out, Julian, it has been achieved to some extent with an overspend in the systems and an underspend of almost $1 billion on the transformation and reserves. And some of that transformation is the digital infrastructure of the system. And so the question is how long one can go on avoiding, as it were, perforce, the necessary transformation. Although I accept that an enormous amount of what has been described in terms of improvement of performance is transformation. But I mean, there is some physical transformation that probably is a problem.
Julian, do you want?
I mean, I would just say that all sorts of decisions have been made around prioritisation as we've gone through the year, but last year we would have spent pretty much over £2 billion in aggregate on the kind of technology transformation programme, which is actually a significant increase on the previous year. So notwithstanding all the pressures, even within this, we continue to make progress on the things we need to do for the long term, on technology-enabled change, the long-term workforce plan, actually the diabetes prevention programme and other areas. Of course, at times we would like to go further faster. But we have continued to make progress on our long-term goals.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I always go back to the NHS app, and I go back to actually, like in last year we awarded the FTP, which was very good, and now we've got the agreement with the support of the Chancellor and the Department and the Prime Minister clearly for the 3.4 billion technology budget. It doesn't come till 25-26, but actually the detailed work that's going on, Julian, with you and Vin and others around actually how do we deploy that across our systems to give us a better chance of investing behind technology to drive the productivity uplift. But that was a really good thing to have received, a good amount of funding to have received. Looking forward to that further transformation. The point you make is absolutely right. We need to keep investing and perhaps invest even more, but keep investing behind our digital estate. Mary, did you want to?
Thank you. Mine was just to congratulate the element of spend on the community diagnostic centres and in particular the eradication of 9% of mental health dormitories into better environments for patients, which I also think will enhance retention in mental health because it will make life much easier. So I think it's easy to miss a relatively small point that really is improving care.
Thank you. So Vin and then Robert, I think, and then I might need to move us on given time of it. Vin?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to highlight, I think, something, so certainly as someone who's got experience as a consultant in NHS for 30 years, something that genuinely galvanises staff is the opportunity to really help those who experience the greatest inequality in our communities. And so something that you don't always bring out in the performance reports, for example, is in cancer, our targeted lung health checks programmes had a disproportionate impact on those who experienced that. The National Diabetes Prevention Programme, we know that diabetes particularly affects people like me from South Asian backgrounds and those experiencing inequality. We've got evidence showing that helps. And then to pick up Mary's point, the community diagnostic hubs were specifically planned to be placed in areas which had the poorest outcomes and therefore the best access. And I just think it's important for us to note that, and also note the way in which that genuinely incentivises staff, I think, and galvanises them.
Thank you. Robert?
So just to reinforce the congratulations that have been given for remarkable performance in year. Just picking up on the diabetes point that was highlighted by Jane and related also to cancer. Obesity, we're all aware, is a huge issue and is a contributory factor for diabetes, of course, and a risk factor for cancer. And we agreed this morning that we'd have a fresh look at our diabetes strategy in light of these drugs that have emerged that control appetite, but also have more immediate benefits in terms of cardiovascular risk and insulin resistance. So I think that'll be an important discussion.
Yeah, very good. It reflects a very good conversation we had in the private board. So let's draw that sort of operational performance reporting and financial reporting to a close. As I do that, I just want to reiterate something I said at the start. We recognise we face lots of challenges, and we know we can do, and we're focused on doing better and improving performance. But we also recognise the intense demand pressure that we're seeing, and whether you pick it out in mental health or in other areas actually, but we see particular lift in mental health presentation in the last year or so. It's also reflecting on Julian's comments, and again at the private board, as well as just very brief comments he's made today, that I think we are deploying resources, Julian, led by you, with really careful thought. And the engagement, certainly the feedback I've had from the systems working, so Amanda and Julian and Emily and others engaged with the systems around this year's planning, actually is showing a really good collaboration across the systems, actually. So the ICB is working well with the providers. Actually, they're working together, and they're wrestling with the problem of how do we manage these resources with a very low increase, 0.2%, I think, increase in resources, and yet much higher demand. And they're working really well together in general, collaborating on a solution. And as I said earlier, thanks to the huge efforts and hard work of staff across the NHS, we are providing record levels of healthcare. And we touched on it, I think, at the last public board meeting. I'm sure we did, and it was just one example of the lift in the provision of healthcare. So primary care and our GP, our general practitioners, and our primary care other health staff, whether they're physios or practice nurses or district nurses or so on, and to think that they're doing 23% more appointments every year than they were doing in the year prior to the pandemic, and more than 1 in 10 of the population has an appointment in England every week. More than 1 in 10 of the population has an appointment in primary care every week. And so actually it's quite a remarkable performance, and they're an example actually of what we see across everywhere else in the system, whether it's in secondary trusts or across ICBs or other areas of provision. So let's move on. Yes, of course.
Sorry, Richard. I know you've just done a summary, but you might just.
What have you corrected me?
It's not that at all. But just before we do leave this item, because I did want to thank colleagues for what you have done, which is recognise that the year that we've just finished has been a year of actually real and meaningful improvement. But also just to say that, of course, that does follow what was the most massive disruption from COVID. So this is a recovery journey, that we are on, and we have a lot further to go. And I think your point, Richard, about demand is really important, because we have an ageing population and we have an increasingly sick population, and the demands on the NHS are only going in one direction as a consequence. So this is really important. It's really important that the NHS can show that, you know, despite all of those demand side pressures, and as Julian has said, within a financial context, we have made real and meaningful improvement, which we can now build on. But the thing I did want to just say is, it is because our colleagues across the NHS have worked unbelievably hard over the past year, and against that backdrop, it feels pretty relentless.
Yeah.
So I think it's just to say, for all of the acknowledgement that's happened in this meeting, actually the acknowledgement has to be for our colleagues, because they're the ones that really do the work, and they do it because every day they get up and do their best for patients, and that is one thing about the NHS that hasn't changed.
Thank you for saying that. Very good. Okay, let's go. So we're going to item, I think it's number 6 on my agenda, which is NHS productivity. Julian, I think you're leading in on this, I think, aren't you?
Well, I think what Amanda said is almost a perfect segue into actually this item. There's been lots of discussion on NHS productivity over recent months and the last year. As Amanda has just said, in the context is, over the 10 and 15 years before the pandemic, the NHS significantly increased productivity, indeed keeping pace with the wider economy, if not slightly outpacing it, very much bucking the kind of wider public sector trend. But COVID was clearly a massive shock to the system, hugely disruptive. And in the ONS published data, you can see in the year 2021, a significant dip in productivity, both reflecting increase in costs and the disruption to broader services. The ONS published data, which is the sort of most reliable source, I think, on sort of aggregate NHS productivity, shows a sharp bounce back in 21-22, such that aggregate NHS productivity, came from being about 20% below to 6% below where we were before the pandemic. Now, that data is 2 years old. We would anticipate there has been further recovery at the sort of aggregate NHS level, but we wait for, what the ONS data says on 22-23. So, that is sort of what you would expect on a recovery journey, which we are definitely on. Nonetheless, there's been a real focus on, in particular, what has gone on in the acute sector. Now, understanding sort of in more real time what's happened on productivity is hard. It's hard because, as with almost any statistical data set, time brings more data. And actually, in particular, it's hard to track in real time some of the things that are actually going on quality and outcomes. It is harder in real time just because of where our data is at to separate out, if you're an integrated acute and community trust, what's the sort of what has happened on community services versus acute services. And as Steve would remind me, sometimes it's also hard in real time to track what is going on sort of research income and cost, and how that is sort of playing into the total picture. Nonetheless, we have done work to try and understand what is happening in the acute sector, and at least to find out in broad terms where we are and where our focus of effort needs to be, as we can both help support providers and systems to continue on that journey of recovery that Amanda has just referred to. Our own data suggests that if we allow for things that often aren't immediately counted in activity, including where we have really changed pathways over the last few years, and our counting and coding hasn't yet properly caught up. Things like same-day emergency care, virtual wards, a whole series of things of that ilk. And if we properly take account of things like changes in critical care and actually what has happened in maternity, where clearly we have put more investment in order to improve quality and patient safety. And if we properly allow for what is genuinely an increase in sort of acuity, i.e. the sort of the patients we are dealing with are basically sicker and frailer, then, at first blush, it looks like we have a sort of a 10 to 11% drop in productivity in the acute sector. Now, again, in 2023-24, you also have to allow for the fact we've had industrial action. And industrial action has cost us more money and cost us time and lost us activity. And our estimate of that impact is about 3% in the year 2023-24. So, that drops it again to a position where it looks like you've had a drop in productivity of about 7%. Now, again, within that, we can see we've spent about a percentage point, relatively speaking, more on high-cost drugs. Now, those give us better outcomes. Again, that's not captured in the sort of immediate short-term data, and we know that as we are recapitalising the NHS, the investment in technology, community diagnostic centres, elective capacity, in any given year, there's like a depreciation cost, which you don't really start to recover until the year after, or indeed the 2 or 3 years after that. And again, that probably accounts for around a percentage point of that productivity hit. That still leaves a gap. And when we analyse that gap, even allowing for case mix, which means we end up with patients in hospital for longer because they just need more care and treatment and time for reablement, about half of that residual gap is probably still an increase in length of stay. We know, again, that we have more work to do, and Sarah Jane just described the things we as an NHS can still do to improve that position and recover from the disruption we experienced in COVID. But we know also that some of that is driven by the pressures that local authorities and social care has been under. I mean, in 2022, we did see a significant dip in domiciliary care capacity. I mean, local authorities and government have done a lot to recover that position over the last 12 and 18 months. Nonetheless, I think we are still recovering from that disruption, and we can see the pressures those services are under going into this year coming. And we know in mental health, for example, we are seeing mental health services who are spending, NHS mental health services who are spending millions of pounds a year dealing with the homelessness issue and just getting homeless people out of our hospital beds. So there's a series of factors, but some of which remain in the NHS's gift. And as Sarah Jane has said, that is a real focus for improvement over this coming 12 months. That still leaves a gap that we cannot sort of analytically explain in the data that is probably worth 2 to 3% of the gap. Now, factors that will influence that are definitely, there is strong, at least qualitative evidence of a reduction in staff discretionary effort. Now, that is not that surprising if you look at the level of sort of industrial unrest over the last year, and we can point to examples where people have changed their working patterns post COVID. We know that as the data says, we have significantly increased staffing over the last 4 years. By the way, I think that's a good thing. 4 years ago, we were really worried about staffing levels, where were these staff going to come from? But nonetheless, that significantly increases the ratio of newer staff to experienced staff, and we have definitely seen turnover of some of our most experienced staff as we came out of the pandemic. And undoubtedly, that just takes time for people to sort of get up the learning curve. And as people get up the learning curve, productivity improves. And in that context, it's great news that we've seen a significant improvement in the retention rate, and we have seen an improvement in staff engagement over the last year. And again, we know improved staff engagement is correlated with improved productivity. So it shows there's definitely still work to do. And I don't think this is just about us working harder. It's just about how we continue to work, in some cases, smarter, and where we can identify the waste and where we can sort of take away the obstacles and barriers to enabling people to do the best job that they can. And we see we are making progress. For example, high-cost agency staffing. In 22-23, we spent £3.5 billion. In 23-24, we will spend closer to £3 billion. So as substantive staffing has increased, people are, realising they can take out the temporary staffing. We know we are more productive when we have a higher ratio of substantive to temporary staffing, and I think we'll see that continue strongly into 24-25. We know we have improved day case rates, theatre productivity, much higher use of dealing with patients in non-admitted rather than admitted settings. Length of stay in 23-24 improved by about 3%. So that shows, we are on that improvement journey that I described. So, but again, work still to do. So, our plan is very much a focus on how do we support our leaders, managers and staff to have the improvement skills that they need, that they can, seeing what needs to be done, have the tools to deliver change on the ground. And this year, we will put new investment behind NHS Impact and the improvement regime. And some of this is how we relearn the lessons of things that were done well in the early 2000s. And I think very much over the next year and a half, it is focused on how do we do operational improvement. And then clearly, we're already investing in technology in Enable Change, and we'll set out more details of that kind of longer-term program to look at how we can sort of double the annual rate of productivity improvement over the next 5 and 6 years, and we will look to do that in the summer. So I think, that is our best understanding of where we are. More work to do. And no doubt, we are grateful, incredibly grateful for the support the government has given us and the investment for the future. And we will also continue to talk with, them and about how we continue to find, indeed, the investment we will also need to put into the estate, because definitely one of the things that still hinders us is, the kind of growth in critical backlog maintenance and the fact that every day we will be losing a theatre, a ward block, a pathology department, and if we can sort that out, again, that will just take away one of the obstacles to enabling our staff, to do the best job that they can.
Thank you. So I'm going to open up just for comments, questions. Mark, I know you want to ask a question, and Steve. There's going to be a whole flood, actually, so we'll probably batch them, Julian, if that's all right. So Mark and then Steve first.
So thank you very much indeed, Julian. It's an incredibly helpful analysis. And I think one of the challenges of the ONS figure is that it's, one number for an incredibly complex organisation, roughly 10% of the British economy. And so the note it needs is about sort of 3 pages to explain it. But the other striking figure, and you alluded to it in a way, was just comparing in one of the ONS papers you referenced, the rate of public service productivity growth by service area. One of our challenges is that if you look at both adult and children's social care, their productivity is well below where it was in 1997. And that's a problem because it inevitably has consequences for us on length of stay that are quite difficult to deal with.
So, Julian, can you store these in your memory for response then, Steve?
Yes, thanks, Julian. So one comment and two related questions. So the comment is, although I am absolutely sure that clinicians understand the benefit and the need to deliver the highest possible quality of care at the lowest possible cost, the term productivity isn't one that they often embrace. And that's why I think it's really important, as noted in paragraph 17, that this is framed in terms of programs of continuous improvement. Value-based healthcare is something that is familiar to many clinicians and embraces productivity. And so the more we can do this work within the scope of NHS Impact, which is based on the concept of continuous improvement, the better, and equally the getting it right first time program, GIRFT, which again I know, or we all know from visits around the system, is embraced by many clinicians. So I think that framing is really important. And then the two questions which are related. So clearly ONS do make quality adjustments in terms of their measurements. But do you think that that is sufficient to recognise high quality care, so quality of care, not just quantity of care? And secondly, as again noted in the paper, we all want to do more on prevention. And of course, prevention is a resource expended to lead to no activity, hopefully, or a reduction in activity. And have you had discussions, is there a chance of having discussions with ONS about how that is captured?
Should we try one more question for your batch? So, Vin?
Yeah, so it's a comment rather than a question, Chair. Thank you. So first, I think the technology investment is genuinely really exciting, and we can be and will be really ambitious about what we can achieve with that investment. The second bit, which is, I think, the link to productivity and reflects on the comments that Steve's just made. So I used to work for Sarah Jane in Birmingham Children's Hospital, and I used to stamp around the wards saying that if any of the computers worked, I could be at least 10% more productive. And actually the investment in the core infrastructure and technology is really important, and Birmingham Children's is actually implementing an electronic patient record now. And some of our early evidence, because we have digitised now 90% of trusts, so we've not been standing still over the last few years, is that there's a 5 to 10% reduction in non-elective length of stay if you've put an electronic patient record in. So you can get, and there's an evidence base that there'll be measurable benefits that will be better for patients. And similarly for the app, being able to do your repeat prescription on the app doesn't just save GPs time, which is much better for them, but also it saves each patient 18 minutes in being able to order a repeat prescription, so you get a better experience for patients as well. And just the final bit, I think, on the technology, which again relates to Steve's point, is that I think we know from years of experience now that where technology investment goes wrong is where you don't engage and work with your frontline staff about putting in the technology. So in the next few weeks, in the next few months, we will be engaging in a heavy process of engagement with staff. We won't just be doing that through roundtables and visiting trusts. We are also engaging with industry, so we're getting industry's take on it. And then finally, we are agreeing with government the composition of an advisory panel, which will include not just industry experts who've led tech transformation in their own industries, but also frontline NHS staff who've done tech transformation, so we get that right balance between challenge from outside but also challenge from within the organisation. So I must say, with the tech transformation, I'm feeling really positive about what we can achieve once that money starts flowing through from 2025.
So, Julian, do you want to either react to any of those and then answer? I'm going to have to move us on quite soon.
Yeah, I'll try and make it quick and just pick up on a few things. So firstly, on local authorities, I mean, I can't speak in detail about like the productivity in the social care sector. What I would say is we've learned quite a lot about how we and local authorities can work effectively together over the last year, 18 months. And I think actually we've learned a lot about what we in the NHS can do, even in the way we are sort of, helping assess patients and getting sort of a common understanding with local authorities about what is the level of care that's actually needed, so that we aren't almost sort of over-prescribing care. And if we can get it right, we can really help them and they can really help us. And clearly, we in actually aspects of mental health, learning disability, are seeing exactly the same demand pressures that they are seeing, which is actually a quite significant increase in demand and complexity of cases. So, as I said, I can't speak in detail, but I think they are seeing pressures that we are also experiencing, and we're learning a lot. actually about how we can help and support each other. The second thing, just on the ONS, I mean, actually, May is here, who is leading this work for us, and we are in active discussions with the ONS on how we are measuring productivity. Now, there's always the challenge, can we improve the data around quality and outcomes, and no doubt that will form part of it. But one of the things we're actively discussing with them is how do you take account of actions which prevent activity. Now, I suspect what we'll have to do is work out how you count that activity and how you put a value on it, basically, which is the value of what you've avoided. Yeah. Now, that is not easy to do. It'll be very hard to do in real time, I guarantee it. But we're in active discussion with them, because clearly that does form part of actually how we double NHS productivity over the next 5 and 6 years.
Thank you. So, Board, okay, if I move on, I'm just conscious of time. Julian, thank you for a very cogent, actually, presentation of productivity as we measure it, and actually the various initiatives we have that actually we know we'll be confident that we continue to improve. So let's go to item 7. So it's an update on the first year of the maternity and neonatal 3-year plan. Ruth, are you going to lead in?
Yes, I am, but we'll be briefer than normal to allow more conversation.
Please, that would be very helpful.
But as you said in your opening remarks, and Amanda did as well, we have all seen and heard and read the tragic stories of the birth trauma shared by women and families as part of the APPG group on birth trauma this week. The testimonies of those women who have experienced the traumatic birth and makes extremely difficult reading for everyone. And for me, it further reinforces the importance of listening to women and taking the appropriate action in response. Improving maternity and neonatal care is one of the highest priorities for us as an NHS. And despite the improvements that's been made in maternity and neonatal services over the last decade, we know that there's much more to do. Which is why we did develop the 3-year delivery plan for maternity and neonatal services. And this does bring together the recommendations from Donald Ockenden reports into Shrewsbury and Telford, and Bill Kirkup into East Kent, so that we do drive up maternity and neonatal services. They're safer, they're more personable, and of course more equitable for women, babies and families. Now, that delivery plan included requirements for all levels within the NHS, as well as there being national responsibilities. It's very clear about the responsibility for every board and ICB to identify the areas of improvement and to take the action to improve maternity and neonatal care. And I know around this board, we are also committed to ensuring that is achieved as well. So this week, as Amanda said, we too have welcomed the opportunity to work with the government to develop the cross-government strategy to maximise the impact of the 3-year delivery plan and to address the wider determinants of health and inequalities. As I mentioned before, and indeed you both did too in your remarks, listening and responding to all women and families is an essential part of ensuring safe and high quality care. It improves the safety and the experience of those using maternity and neonatal services, and it addresses health inequalities. It is also vitally important to embed the service user voice into the services, and that includes at a leadership level. You will now hear from a very important member of our team, Kelly, who is our neonatal service user voice representative and is an integral member of our team at all levels. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. Good afternoon all. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to join today. So as Ruth said, I'm Kelly Zackley and I'm a neonatal service user voice representative within the maternity and neonatal programme. You may be more familiar with the term patient and public voice member. So my daughter was diagnosed with multiple congenital anomalies at our 12-week scan, which resulted in a complex pregnancy and a 3.5-month stay in neonatal intensive care. So for us, although this experience was traumatic, it was made as positive as possible due to the competent and compassionate multidisciplinary workforce and the dedication to providing personalised care, not solely for our daughter, but for us as a family. Following her admission, though, I recognise the inequity of care provided and access to specialist expertise across an ICB footprint, let alone regionally or nationally. Hence my desire to be involved in improving outcomes and experiences for women, birthing people and families. Alongside me in my role, there are a group of strategic service user voice representatives, and we all have lived experience of maternity and neonatal services, both positive and negative. We are interwoven throughout the whole maternity and neonatal programme and recognised as key stakeholders at committee, board and leadership group level. We do recognise how advanced the embedding of service user voice is within the maternity and neonatal programme compared to some others. However, we must also acknowledge the lack of role security and tenure we experience as PPV members. As we have said today, there have been various inquiries, reports and recommendations relating to maternity and neonatal services, with the latest publication being just this week on birth trauma, and other inquiries are yet to conclude. And sadly, as we've said, a common theme is threaded throughout all of these, and an emerging duplication of recommendation continues: to listen to service users. So there are two essential elements relating to service users and listening. Firstly, the importance of listening to women, birthing people and their families at the point of care to improve their outcomes and experiences. We cannot fulfil our vision of providing safer, more equitable and more personalised care for all if we do not listen. And remember that what we hear are not stories, these are people's lived experience, and this will impact them for the rest of their life. Plus, we know it isn't enough to just listen, our actions must relate to what we have heard. The second essential element is how it's vital for maternity and neonatal service user voice to be integrated within quality, safety, governance and assurance processes, and for service improvements to be co-produced with those who have lived experience. So at a local level, we have maternity and neonatal voice partnerships, known as MNVPs, and they are the mechanism for ensuring this is achieved. However, variation in resourcing and embedding of MMBPs remains, and that is why the spring budget allocation for MMBPs will be a welcomed additional funding stream. This funding will be utilised to strengthen the work of the MMBP at a local level, and particularly in relation to the integration of neonatal service user voice. We know that maternity and neonatal services are inextricably linked, and neonatal families view their journey as a continuum. They do not differentiate between the two services. They are not aware that these services are commissioned differently, and for these families, their neonatal journey does not start or end on the neonatal unit. Hence the need for us to ensure that feedback collection mechanisms are equipped to support maternity and neonatal service user voice. We must also acknowledge the need to support collaborative working across MMVPs and neonatal parent advisory groups and also VCSE organisations. And this is to ensure that neonatal voices are represented at both a local and network level. Working in partnership will support the continuation to influence decisions once neonatal commissioning arrangements have been delegated to ICBs. The additional funding from the spring budget will enable MMVPs to have dedicated capacity to focus on improving neonatal outcomes and experiences for these vulnerable service users. I just want to end by thanking all the service users who share their experiences, and also the service user voice representatives who work tirelessly at a local, regional and national level to progress the implementation of embedding service user voice. I would also like to thank those who work within the system that really see the value of involving those with lived experience and ensure that it is ingrained within their daily practice. We must remember that one avoidable death, one case of harm, one experience of birth trauma, and one parent being unable to stay with their baby in neonatal care, these are all one too many. And unfortunately, funding to increase workforce numbers is only part of the solution. We need the infrastructure to foster a competent, confident, compassionate and well-supported multidisciplinary workforce. But an even bigger requirement is the need for a change in culture. And a vital element to support that transition is the need to listen to and work collaboratively with service users. Because I really feel that together we can strive towards safer, more equitable and more personalised care for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And just to pick up a few other points, if I may, Chair.
I want you to be really, it's a very important topic, but I do want to give the board the chance to engage with it. So if you present to us for the whole of the time, we won't get the conversation done.
Highlight a couple of areas.
That'd be great. Thanks,
Thank you to Kelly for all the work that she does with us. I did just want to pick out, you take the board as the paper as read, but just a couple of areas to particularly highlight and actually feeds into some of the other conversations that have been had this afternoon, but there is a growing issue facing our maternity and neonatal services, which are factors which are influencing the complexity of care. So pre-existing conditions, changes in maternal BMI, age, improving care for very premature babies is leading to much more complex care needs. And so we're working to understand what that means for the future implications for care pathways, clinical policy, staffing, estates requirements, and that will continue to be part of our ongoing strategy discussions. Just a couple of improvements to highlight. I think it's worth just noting that we have seen some improvement in our CQC survey over the last year. So 25,500 women who used maternity services showed that there was often a better experience in maternity care than the year before. However, we know, and as other colleagues have rightly said, we've got a lot more to do to improve that experience. We're making good progress on workforce, and particularly you can see from the data, we are making good progress in reducing the gaps in staffing, and particularly you'll see we've got a record number of midwives, and we've improved our retention rates as well. And it's really important that we continue the work on retention, particularly given the fact that we've got a high level of public scrutiny around maternity and neonatal services, and we need to make sure that that doesn't impact those, attracting those into work in our workforce and those that are already working there. But also just to say that we've also got work going on to tackle inequalities, and I think it's really important to just reflect the fact that we've got a significant amount of work going on to address inequalities as well. And culture, as Kelly rightly said, culture is a really important part. We're making really good progress on the leadership and culture programme, and all of our 150 units are going through that programme currently, and that will be they'll all have gone through that by January next year. Just to also highlight the fact that the APPG isn't the only report that we will have over the next 18 months. You'll know that the impact in maternity and neonatal, the Thirlwell inquiry has commenced its preliminary hearings today, and the Ockenden review of maternity and neonatal care at Nottingham University's hospitals is ongoing. And I do want to just draw out the fact that we are working differently with Donna through the review of Nottingham. I chair a group, a bi-monthly group with the Trust executives, Donna, members of Emily's team in terms of improvement directors and others, really to, in real time, understand the emerging themes from the reviews. And I think that's really important, so it enables the Trust ahead of the final report to make improvement, and also for us nationally to get the learning out and to disseminate that and work with partners where we need to make those improvements as well. So I'll stop there, but I will just leave the board with one stat, because I think during this board meeting this afternoon, 156 babies will have been welcomed into the world by the NHS, and I think that stat alone really signifies why the work that we are doing is so important, to make sure that every mum, every baby, every family member gets the right, safe, personalised care and the best experience that they can.
So Duncan, thank you, and Kelly, thank you, by the way, very good presentation and explanation, so thank you. But let's open up to, Mary, do you want to go?
Thank you.
Comments or questions to the team?
Firstly, congratulations, because I think it's being taken very seriously and I was particularly delighted to hear of your user representation involvement. I just wanted to look at whether you feel we've got the preceptorship support right for newly qualified midwives, because we really need to retain them in midwifery. And yet, at the moment, the language is so poor in the press that there must be some who think, I'll get my qualification and maybe not practice in Britain. So I just wanted to ask about that.
So can we'll sort of group the questions again to make it easier for time management, but Andrew.
Thank you. So for me, the most important thing is around culture, and I think, Kelly, you hit the nail on the head there. And not only have we got a kind of leadership challenge, but we've got to make sure that boards are really focused on this, because at the end of the day, NHS England can only do so much. It's the board of a trust, basically, that sets the culture and tone of how it wants to operate within a hospital. And I'm just interested in the work we're doing to support organisations on this. And have we got some very clear markers of improvement around culture as a result of the programme? So I think helping organisations to move on, particularly the ones that you're more concerned about, is a really important dimension here of success. And I'm just interested to know on how much progress is being made.
And within that, there was quite a sort of subtle question, if I can sort of add it, which is, and to what extent, so we're rolling out various improvement programs across all of the units, but to what extent are we also focused on really strong additional support into those units where our data is showing us actually there may be an emerging vulnerability or there's a greater risk? So Mark?
Can I add one thing to your comment, which is, given the number of reports at the moment into some very important issues, how are we extracting the most important actions and making sure they're prioritised?
Thank you.
Which I think is an addition to what you've raised.
Okay. So, do you want to have a go?
Okay,
So, who's going to call?
Right, Duncan first, and I'll finalise.
Okay. Great. So, Donald, actually, do you want to cover the culture element and the what we're doing around culture, and then I'll come in on the other two items.
Yeah, so the Maternity Safety Support Programme we run, and it's a group of 16 senior midwives and obstetricians who go into trusts, often alongside the Recovery Support Programme as the maternity arm of it.
Yeah.
We're getting much better, I think, at getting upstream, so not going in just when things have gone wrong, but we're often invited by trust boards who have identified things that they want some advice about. So we're getting much more proactive about it. We really recognise this business about trust boards, and we're trying to help in all sorts of ways. So, for instance, packaging data. There's so much data around maternity services, and getting the right data to the board in the right way, I think, is really important, and we're doing that. And also, we've been doing a lot of training for non-exec directors, safety board level safety champions. What do they need to know about maternity services? I've taken part personally in 90 face-to-face meetings with boards around maternity services, talking about them and what do they need to know.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. Kelly, did you wanted to make a comment then?
Yeah, I was just saying, I picked up on your point about there's only so much we can do nationally as well. And from a service user voice perspective and influencing that culture, we have published the MMBP guidance, which states our expectations. But also for me, it's really important as a national team that we are role modelling that culture of involving and listening to service users. So as I said before, we're involved in committee, board, leadership group. We co-chair some meetings. The Maternity Safety Support Programme that Donald's mentioned, we have service user voice representation on that, and also specialised commissioning regional visits. So I think there's a really important aspect of that role modelling.
Thank you. And I think just to finally on that point, you see the difference between those trusts that are on the MSSP and the improvement that they make with the engagement that's done by the board. So that's why we've done a lot of work to join up with the Recovery Support Programme, which Emily's team runs. To your point, Mary, around preceptorship, you will probably know that we've put in retention midwives into all of our maternity units over the last few years, and that has enabled not only just focus on those colleagues that have been there for a while, but certainly for those new midwives, and I think we've seen the difference on that. But we know that there is a lot of variation still between the experience of students and our student midwives, and therefore, there's a lot of work that's been done around preceptorship standards and student learning charters, etc. But I think there is still more to do and to reduce down that variation, which I think speaks to the work that we've got to do across the board around maternity and neonatal services and reducing that variation down still further. And then just to your point around prioritising the reports, I think that was, as Ruth said, that was one of the fundamental reasons why we brought the 3-year delivery plan together, to try and clear some of the landscape and to make sure that the recommendations, the prioritisation of those recommendations were really part of that 3-year delivery plan, so that it was clearer for our services. But I think we are going to have to continue through the period of the 3-year delivery plan and beyond, particularly as we look at some of the change in demographics and the impacts of that, to continually look at the prioritisation of those actions. But Ruth, shall I hand back to you?
My final point then would be on that to Mark, which was, if there's only 2 things that a board needs to think about, is listen to women and families. And the second one was focus, put some personal focus on it as a board. And I'm very grateful for this board supporting, nudging, challenging us as a team so that we can collectively across England get to our ambition.
Thank you. Amanda, any comments you want to make before we move on to the next item?
Just to say, I think, again, what others have said, this is an incredibly important conversation, and actually, Duncan, I thought you're just bringing to life why it is, with the number of babies that have been born since we've been having this conversation. Really, it's just a brilliant way of reminding us that actually we don't have any time to waste. So brilliant to see how seriously everybody has taken it. Kelly, thank you for your work, but also for describing in such a, again, a powerful way the truth of, we talk a lot about patient and public involvement, but the truth of, in this programme, how real that is and how material it is to everything that you do. And I think I would just say again, there is so much that's already in the plan that we know we need to do, but just to really welcome the opportunity now for me personally to work with the Secretary of State to pull together that cross-government strategy to make sure that we are taking this with cross-government support, that we're really pushing forward in all of the ways that we know really matter, that we're doing anyway, but that we're also looking for those other opportunities to get behind and support this agenda.
Amanda, thank you. So Ruth, thank you, and Donald and Kelly and Duncan, thank you very much. Very good. So let's move on. We're going to go to item 8, which is the topic of research in the NHS. Vin, I think you're leading in for us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So firstly, I'll just note that I think this board has got some of the most distinguished clinical academics actually in the world on it, and the fact that we've got several of them here, I think, is a measure of how seriously the board takes research, actually in terms of the skill mix. I do just think that's important to note. I always feel slightly humbled by that as well, by being in charge of research. So the second bit, I think, is that I'll just say a few words about how we are working with universities, how we work with patients, how we work with researchers, and then open it up to discussion, Chair, on what else it is that NHS England can do to support research. So the first thing is, I think inherently we all know that research is important, not just in creating new discoveries, but also we know that staff retention's better if you're working in an organisation which does research. And secondly, we know that clinical outcomes are better if you're a patient and you're you're in a research study. So it's important at a number of levels. As I said, NHS England works in partnership with the National Institute of Health Research and the Medical Research Council and other funding bodies. And actually, we've got very distinct roles, which are set out in the paper in paragraph 8. And it is important to remember we are not the sole national body responsible for research. Now, there are three particular ways that I think we just want to reflect on in the ways that we in NHS England are working with to promote research. So the first thing is that the NHS DigiTrial service supports academics with recruiting patients, so 140,000 participants recruited into the Galeri trial, thanks to NHS DigiTrials. Secondly, volunteers who wish to participate in research can register through the NHS app. So 80% of people who've registered as part of Be Part of Research have registered through the app. And then thirdly, we also specifically work with local communities through our trusted engagement networks to particularly work with community leaders in local underserved communities to make sure that they fully participate in research as well. So that's the way in which we are working with patients and members of the public on it. Secondly, how do we work with academics? Well, of course, there are long-standing partnerships in the NHS through things such as biomedical research centres and others, through clinical research facilities with which we've worked and created some of the best research facilities in the world, actually. And so it's to make the UK a good place to do research. But very practically speaking, some of the work we've undertaken more recently, recognising that prior to the pandemic, the number of patients being recruited into commercial clinical trials was dropping, which has now started increasing. For example, we have developed a single costing and contracting mechanism, which has taken more than 100 days off the time takes to create a contract for research, so it reduces the setup time for a clinical trial. Secondly, we're building research data infrastructure through our secure data environments across England, which will provide a much richer set of data in which research can happen. And thirdly, we demand signal out to industry and out to academia about the sorts of studies we think are important for our studies. And so, for example, Ruth's team have produced a nursing research strategy, and we've also put out calls, for example, for mental health research and stroke research, which have led to an increasing number of funding calls. So those are all the good things that we do, I think, in research, where we've shown real evidence of progress and of teamwork. But nevertheless, there are some key challenges that I think are important. We've set those out in the paper. So I'll pause there, Chair, and let the board discuss perhaps some of the key questions in the paper that members may wish to raise. So let's go Robert, then Steve, then Mark, and then we'll batch those up. Okay, so Robert.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, and thanks very much for the paper, and it's great to have it on the board agenda, and there's a lot of great stuff in the paper. The risk when the health service is under such intense pressure is that research can be seen as a nice to have. You've made some of the recent points as to why it should be seen as essential. I just add to that actually, if we capitalise on the opportunities that research provides, we can address some of the pressures in the longer term. So we can get much smarter and better at prevention. We can use engineering skills and technologies to re-engineer pathways to become more productive, back to productivity. And using discovery, we can take some chronic diseases and cure them. So that's the ambition that we should have with our research agenda, and I think that's why it's so important. So the only thing I would say, and you mentioned universities, I think making university partnerships with the NHS work really well is key to realising on our potential. And likewise, life sciences industries who really want to partner with us because we've got such fantastic resources to facilitate drug discovery. So really positive, but I would just emphasise those two partnerships in particular.
Thank you, Robert. Steve?
Well, it was really to build on Robert's point. So again, I really welcome that we are discussing this at the board today, but I think it's important to recognise that it's the same staff that have delivered all those improvements that we've seen in care and performance indicators, such as the faster diagnosis standard earlier in the board, that are also driving the research and supporting the clinical trials and all the research that goes on in the NHS. And as Robert says, that is particularly challenging at the moment for all the reasons we know about pandemic recovery and recovering waiting lists. So it's important that we recognise that that balance is difficult to achieve at the moment, but it's also important that we recognise it should be a both and not an either or, because for all the reasons you said, it's important that we undertake research and support research. And the final thing I'd say is that clinicians, and it's not just doctors, in my experience, really enjoy and get a huge amount of personal satisfaction out of undertaking research and seeing the benefits that derive from that research. So giving clinicians the time and the space and the resource to do this also has benefits in terms of energising them, enthusing them for all the other great work they do.
Thank you.
I think just to add to all of that, the pattern of disease is not a constant. So there are constantly new diseases emerging. We're learning more about rare diseases, so diseases such as spinal muscular atrophy are potentially curable by genetic therapies. And rare diseases collectively are very common, and it tends to be academic research staff that work on these and help to understand. And so for all those reasons, research has got to be absolutely intrinsic to the health service. And you could look at COVID and say that the UK, the recovery trial, was the best trial in the world. It was the largest trial in the world. It showed drugs that did work, dexamethasone, and drugs that didn't work, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin. And I think in many ways that could only have been done in a system like the National Health Service. So the opportunities are enormous, and we've just got to make sure we've got a workforce that's equipped and able to carry this on.
Do you want to react to those?
Yeah, so 3 points, I think. So first, I think on Robert's point, we do work very closely with NHS to make absolutely certain that particularly we signal to them that both operational research and systems research is as important to the service as is biomedical research. To talk to Steve's point, we have just published finance guidance for finance directors of trusts to make sure that particularly where there's income, either from funding bodies or from commercial clinical trials, that those actually find their way into job plans, for example, for consultants and for nursing staff and for others involved in research, and so their time's released. And I've certainly been to Coventry recently, where the Chief Finance Officer is also the Chief Research Officer for the organisation, so they're absolutely embedded as part of it. The third bit is I absolutely agree with Mark, particularly on rare diseases research, particularly having worked at places like Birmingham Children's and Great Ormond Street, where we treat patients with rare diseases. One of the key points behind that, and I briefly mentioned our research data infrastructure, is of course you need large data sets in order to identify and understanding the root causes of rare diseases, particularly the genomic ones. One of the important things about creating large data sets is that we take the public with us, because there's understandable public ask questions about the security of their data and to make sure it's properly de-identified, but we can still conduct research. In fact, I spent Saturday working with a citizens' jury and members of the public in Sheffield, but there were simultaneous events being to Plymouth and Canterbury and to London, where we're working with the public to understand both their attitudes to research data and also working with them on how we can best optimise their participation in research and their trust in research data. And in fact, one of the members of the public I spoke to had opted out of her data being used, and having heard all the benefits of research and participating in the data, decided to opt back in again because she had a rare disease and wants to participate in it. And so we can make a real difference with this kind of engagement.
Ruth, I know you want to make...
Just very, very quick, just saying that was part of the nursing strategy for research. We wanted to focus on nurses themselves being the primary investigator, but also clinical academic careers and working with partners across in the university. So Joseph Manning at Nottingham, for example, is a great example of a paediatric nurse consultant also working in the university, and we should encourage more of that type of approach. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So I'm going to close this topic down now for this board's, for the purpose of this board, but we know it's going to come back. And we had a very good discussion on it this morning at the private board, and one of the things we agreed then was to bring it back to make sure we keep, in fact, increase our focus on just making sure that our research engines and our research collaborations and our energies are are continuing to improve and increase. Thank you. So we're going to go on to the item which is actually just reporting on the completion of the new NHS England programme. And in this one, I'm actually asking the board at the end of the conversation to approve, I think, 4 things. First, that we're going to close down the NHS Oversight Committee that has been actually running as a subcommittee of the board, governing for the past 2 years, actually, the merger of essentially 5 entities, four entities, and the rationalisation of the programmes and the workforce and so on. The second approval actually is that we retain a very small programme team at the centre reporting to the CDO, and that's to deliver ongoing areas of work. It isn't completely finished, but we think it's in a state now where it should go back into direct executive management without needing a separate subcommittee. And then that's the third approval, which we agree that the NHS execs will assume accountability for the areas of ongoing work. Board committee oversight will apply as normal through the normal board committees, subcommittees that exist, but without this particular one. But that will include, and we should make sure that we bring it out, that it includes the continued work on organisation design and culture programme, as well as the establishment of an internal improvement team. So whilst the initial merger, etc., has finished, actually there's continuing momentum and within the programme, just to make sure that NHS England continues the model to work to its best endeavours. And then actually we should just note, it's less than approval, actually we just want to note planned internal and external communications on the closure of the programme and the learning we've got from it and the next steps that will be pursued. So those will be the approvals I'll ask for the board, that I'm asking for the board's support for when we bring the conversation to a close. But Steve, to you, I think.
Thank you, Chair. You've done my pitch for me, actually.
Just the approval, Steve.
just to reflect on a couple of points. So we talked through the meeting about this being one of the largest UK public sector changes, and it has undoubtedly touched every single member of NHS England, Health Education England, and NHS Digital over quite some time, and in quite profound ways in many respects. And that's partly because of the size of the task, bringing 5 organisations together at the same time as redesigning and downsizing and changing how we plan to work. So doing that all in one go has meant that it has been quite a long and quite a challenging process for colleagues in the organisation. And that, to be fair, a very big difference from many other industries is that people in those organisations, this is not the first reorganisation. So this has been a relatively constant set of restructuring that has happened over many years. So this was not the first time that colleagues have had to go through this. And that has quite a disruptive effect for colleagues working in the organisations, but also in terms of the work that we do to try and support the NHS. And of course, it's worth just calling out that as we have done this over the last couple of years, integrated care boards have also had to go through changes across the country to reduce their running costs. So not to repeat what colleagues have said, but perhaps to say that although it has been a long and difficult road, a number of the commitments that we made at the beginning of the programme in terms of reducing our complexity, our silo working, releasing money to go back to the front line and trying to create, as Richard, as you described it, a more streamlined organisation. We've got the possibility to achieve that. Much of the work has been done to put the foundations in place. And as colleagues have said, the structural change has come to an end. Although it is important to recognise there's a very small group of colleagues who are still going through the final redeployment part of the process. All of those changes have had quite an impact on morale for people, because alongside that restructuring, we've had recruitment freezes in place for quite some time. But I think it's also important to say, and Amanda made this point more eloquently than I will, that throughout the board discussions, we've talked about really positive improvements that have been secured. Now, lots of that has been down to the hard work of people in the service. But it's also true to say that lots of that has been supported by the hard work of colleagues in NHS England. And there has been rather a lot of discretionary effort that has gone alongside the engagement in the change programme. So there is also, is that the rain? There's also a really important opportunity in front of us, because the structural change puts responsibility at a national level for people, for policy, and for technology in one organisation. And to bring those things together gives us a really good opportunity to lead the NHS and support the NHS in a very different way and in a much simpler and more joined up way. And I think, Richard, you've previously called out examples like the long-term workforce plan and the digital investment that has been secured as examples of the benefits that we can see. So the second part, I think, just to say is, although the structural change has come largely to an end, we have got, and colleagues in NHS England and in the service have been really clear about this, we've got to go quite significantly beyond the structural change to realise the benefits. That is all about focusing on our organisation, our ways of working, the culture that we have in the organisation, and making sure that what we do adds value. And as you say, the intention, that in the way we intend to do that is largely through NHS Impact. So, Richard, I'll not say any more other than a very final quick word to say we have done a very extensive lessons learned, and I think it's important for colleagues in the organisation, our stakeholders, to know that we have done that. It has been quite a challenging process in terms of listening to, absorbing and considering the feedback that has been given, and there are some quite profound lessons in there if you were to enter into a restructure of that nature again. And of course there are different ways to maintain ongoing agile deployment and incrementally improving the way the organisation works, rather than throwing everything up in one go. So I think it's important to say that we have done that and will continue to reflect on some of the points that we've
Thank you. Let's open up for comments. Mike, I think you wanted to ask a question.
I was just looking around the table. I think Andrew and I are the two non-execs who are left standing on the original committee 2.5 years on, and that reflects on the scale of time and change that you've gone through. So I would start by congratulating you and your team, and indeed the rest of the exec, on seeing through what has been a very long and disruptive process, and that inevitably has an impact on the individuals at the front line who are affected by the changes that we've made. I think it's a fair comment on the committee that we're talking about, that it has set out to do the right thing. And we have had many robust discussions during the committee about what the right thing is, because always in these situations there's a degree of ambiguity, and you're making choices about people's lives and livelihoods which are never easy. You've reflected already on some of the changes for the future, so to some extent it is the foundations, and really building from this is the challenge of the organisation going forward. And the last point I made, which was a point you made the end, was you now have a handbook that you can hand to any large organisation who will need to go through this form of change and ultimately reorganisation disruption as a template that can be used in the future. I hope that the NHS won't go through the same process in the future. I hope that it will be done through a series of iterations rather than wholesale change, but equally if anybody else goes through this kind of change, you've got the template. So, but thank you for your work and for the work of the team, and indeed your predecessor, who certainly did quite a lot in the beginning.
I mean, what I would add actually is I would. It's quite often easy to forget that actually what we now do as the NHS England board, and through the board and the subcommittee structure below us, is actually we are now overseeing and challenging and working with the executives on what were the agendas of 5 entities. So before that, there were 5 different organisations running with boards, running with objectives, running with agendas, running with their own subcommittees, and actually we've combined all those. And it's only been possible to do that because actually the way that you know, Steve, with Amanda's leadership and all the execs, you've reorganise the way NHS England absorbing those other entities operate. And I've got the numbers wrong now in my head, but there's something like over 100 different programs we're running, and they're now sort of consolidated into, but rationalised into, and thematically into about 13 programs. And the benefit of that, when we think about how does NHS England, representing now all of these different entities, engage with the systems, is that there aren't now 5 different head office entities engaged with the systems. There is one consolidated system. And also, you have created a far better coordination, interconnectivity structure with NHS England as it reaches out into either regions or into the ICBs or into the trusts and elsewhere in the system. And that allows us to form a much better view. So instead of having over 100 programmes communicating out requests for information, reports and so on, actually they're more rationalised. I'm sure we'll still be often seen, I'm here from head office and here to help, because that's always the burden. But actually, in a way, it's lost how fundamental a restructuring you have achieved at the same time as actually shrinking the organisation by over a third. And it is one of the largest, if not the largest, public sector, I think, restructurings, reorganisations that's been achieved within an organisation that's continuing then essentially to operate in that head office function. So it's a huge compliment to everybody, and I think it will I think it does make already, and it will continue to make a real difference. But it's not over, and so when we have this approval to pass now the continuing work and the oversight and the governance and how the machine runs, Amanda, back into the execs without this specific committee, I'm sure you'll continue to make improvements and changes to the way that the structure operates. Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, I just want to make one observation, Richard, just to thank a group of people from my perspective as one of the executive members that's been leading this, and just to mention a group that we haven't actually pulled out specifically, which is we've been incredibly reliant on our team leaders to effectively lead teams through a difficult kind of period with considerable uncertainty for the staff that they lead. And just to make the observation that I know certainly in my area I've been incredibly grateful for the work that the team leaders have done, and just one specific group, which again Steve has done some amazing work leading on behalf of the executive, but he's been working with a group of design and implementation leads from each individual directorate, and certainly mine has actually had a day job to do alongside that really busy piece of work. And Amanda, you were talking about the work of the Greener team, so in fact it's been the leader of the Greener team who's been our design and implementation lead. So I just think it's important to just recognise how reliant we've been on our team leadership to take us through this process.
Thank you. Well said, Chris. And so, as we move on, can I just assume that the board is giving the approval? You can see it in the paper, and I read them out earlier on. So thank you very much. Let's go on to this item 10. I think, Ruth, are you leading in on this? So it's specific equality duties.
I'm going.
And it's a 2024 SED review.
Yeah, on behalf of other executive colleagues, I'm just going to say one sentence and hand over for just 2 or 3 sentences more to Neil at the end. So it's a legal requirement for NHS England to publish annually, and how we meeting our equality duties and improving the outcomes for all is central, obviously, to our strategy. Neil.
Thank you very much. So briefly, hello, good to see you again. The purpose of annual reporting is really to drive transparency and accountability. It gives us a chance to set out what we see the issues as being, what we've done about them, and what we're planning to do. I'd want you to be cited as a board on the priorities of our regulator, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is particularly focused on black maternal health, on inappropriate detention, people with learning disability and autism, or people with, from ethnic minorities under the Mental Health Act, and also on the experiences of ethnic minority staff. You'll see quite a bit set out in the report there. Yeah. I think we feel that progress has been made in a year where there has been a lot of change, but to see real impact, it does take time. We don't need to set new objectives yet, so we're recommending that those be extended until 25-26, at which point we will need to set new objectives. But on the whole, some good progress, but this is quite a thorough exercise across the whole organisation, and it's important for you to see the work that's been happening.
Actually, why did I misunderstood that? Why will we need? I mean, we could do, but why will we need to set new objectives in 25, 26?
It's a requirement of the EHRC in the reporting that the objectives are reviewed at least once every 4 years. So I mean,
we could leave the same ones in. I'm not saying we should, by the way, but
yes,
okay.
We need to do a more thoroughgoing exercise.
I understand. Yeah, very good. So, any comments or questions? It's a very clear, I think, report. It sets out clearly our performance here on equality. Any comments or questions or reactions from members of the board? I think it's a very straightforward, it is actually a very well written report and very, very clear. So thank you very much for that. Let's go then on to, I think it's not quite the last item yet. No, it's item number 11. So it's the Oversight and Assessment Framework. And I think, Steve, are you... Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So Adam and I will cover this. We'll do so relatively briefly. So again, I hope the paper is helpful. So just to do a little bit about the why and the what with this. So again, big theme through the board discussion just demonstrates how important the NHS is to everybody. It has a profound impact on people's health and well-being. It helps us keep mentally and physically well, and it's there for us when we get ill. So one of the things that we do is to try and help identify success for the NHS and identify areas where improvement is needed. And this is a sort of area that has evolved over the years. So when ICBs were put on a statutory footing, we published the operating framework, which largely sets out how we try and work with each other in pursuit of the goal of NHS England, which is to lead the NHS to secure high quality care for all. We also have what's known as the Oversight framework, which sets out how we determine success. So the kind of how we look at what does success look like, where are there areas that we might want to improve on, where are there areas we might want to learn from. The Oversight framework was last updated a couple of years ago, and at the time we made a commitment that as the new system architecture came into place, we would reflect on the changes that we might want to make to reflect the duties of integrated care boards and integrated care systems across a much broader range of responsibilities. And we went through a process of talking to NHS leaders about what they would like to see from that piece of work, and there were 3 or 4 things that came through in those conversations. There was request for clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities between all of the constituent parts that make up the NHS. There was a request that we view success for both things that are short-term measures and also those things that are more medium-term measures. And Jane's example earlier is a good example of that request about balance, so that we're concentrating on really important access issues, but we're also concentrating on prevention and improving outcomes and reducing health inequalities. So there's a request for looking at a broader set of success measures, and also to make the assessment slightly less subjective than perhaps it's been in the past. I can see Emily smiling already. But where there is a need for improvement, that the framework is underpinned by strong, mature relationships and an improvement focus. So we've developed, on the back of that engagement, an update to the Oversight framework which seeks to address that. And again, we've tested that update with NHS leaders and key stakeholders over the last 4 to 5 weeks. To try and pull all of that together, we think that there are 3 key pillars. So the first is about leadership development. The second is about the Oversight framework, and the third is about NHS impact, which, as we've said a couple of times through this meeting, is the mechanism by which we're hoping the NHS will continuously improve. This pillar, this discussion, is about the second of those things, which is the Oversight framework. I won't go through the detail because it's hopefully clear in the paper, but basically the paper sets out the approach that we'll take, which is to consider the capability of providers and integrated care boards against their key functions, and we'll also assess a range of measures and metrics that we call the delivery assessment, which reflect the unique responsibility of each of those organisations across the 4 purposes that we've set, which is improving access and outcomes, reducing health inequalities, improving productivity and value, and supporting wider economic development. That will lead to a rating for each organisation, but because we are very keen to make sure that people collaborate at a system level and take responsibility for the whole population, we've introduced something that's described in the paper as a double lock, and that will basically consider the total system performance across the key recovery priorities that we set. And where an organisation is doing really well, if the broader system is struggling, then we will take that into account through the double lock process to bind people together. A couple of final things just to say is this framework focuses on the NHS. That's important to draw out, as I think that is not because we think that the NHS doesn't play a very important part in the wider integrated care partnership. But it wouldn't be for NHS England to assess the progress for integrated care partnerships priorities, because they are developed between local government and the NHS. The assessment of integrated care partnerships is much more the territory of the CQC, who have been developing their approach. We've heard probably 4 things through the engagement that we've done. There's been broad support for the approach. People have welcomed the attempt to bring clarity around roles and responsibility. There's been a request for us just to continue to reflect on whether we've got the balance of the short-term and medium-term right, and a request that, although it is very complicated as a system, that we try and make sure the framework is not overly complex and doesn't add too much burden, and that we make sure there's alignment with other regimes, such as the CQC, as far as possible. So the next steps for us are to undertake a short period of public consultation, which we intend to start at the back end of May, and then we will, subject to board approval, publish the final framework and go live in July. During that time, we will be preparing how we need to change within NHS England to work. This will be quite a significant change in the way that we approach it. It builds on the conversation that we just had before. And the final part to this is to say, alongside the Oversight framework, we will publish 3 documents, because the Oversight framework isn't trying to solve all problems. So we'll publish what is known as the Insightful Board series, which will give a bit more information about the sorts of things that highly performing, well-governed boards should be looking at through their governance on an ongoing basis. There'll be one for the provider sector, there'll be one for integrated care boards, and importantly, there'll be one for NHS England to set out how we should govern ourselves in line with our responsibilities. So the board doesn't need to approve the start of consultation. The board will need to approve the framework once we've consulted on it, which will be during July. But I'll pause there, Richard, and happy to take any questions.
And you've got Adam in case of any difficult questions.
Absolutely.
So we've got.
I think you should maybe give him a really difficult question, Richard.
Yes, we've got Mary, then Mark, then Robert, I think. So Mary.
Just 2 fairly straightforward questions, I think. When we say NHS executive, are we including in that the regional offices? Because I wasn't quite sure when I read it. Yep. And then secondly, where do providers who aren't part of the NHS fit in terms of monitoring? Because there are quite a few in mental health.
Yep. Do you want to take that?
Let's go around. Mark?
So thank you very much indeed. I suppose the thing I'm slightly concerned about is that you've got on the left, I'm looking at the figures in the annex, the 4 core purposes, so improve population health, tackle inequalities. And what I can't see is sort of sufficient clinical measures of outcome. So you map them across, and then I can't quite see, you know, how can you measure improvement in population health and healthcare if you don't know what the baseline population health is on a sort of ICB by ICB basis, and simply because they will differ, and similarly inequalities. And so I'm just sort of slightly concerned that what's on the right isn't going to map across to the left to actually give us measures on whether health outcomes are being improved.
That might be a question for Adam. Possibly, I don't know. Robert?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is really helpful, and it's fundamental to the functioning of this board, it seems to me. I mean, in shorthand, it's to oversee the performance of the ICBs, having delegated responsibility for performance and financial management. Just returning to an earlier topic of this board discussion, the research thing, would I be right in assuming that the research responsibility of ICBs would be captured in securing transformation and learning?
So, do you want to have a go at those or bring Adam in on those?
I'll have a quick go and then Adam can correct all the bits I get wrong. So, Mary, just on your point about NHS England, I think, as opposed to NHS Executive.
Sorry, yes,
I just
wanted
to no, it was actually called that 25 years ago. So we've deliberately not drawn a distinction between regional teams and national teams because we are trying to work as a single integrated organisation. That's been something the service has asked us to do, so we're just saying NHS England.
I think that's wonderful. It just might need to be made clear in the eventual paper so that everybody knows. And
Understood.
I have been in the health service more than 25 years, so I'm going to excuse myself.
So on the non-NHS providers, you're absolutely right. There's a number in place. We won't oversee them through this framework, but they will be overseen through the contracts that they hold with their commissioners. So that will also apply to primary care and dentistry and so on at this point. Very quickly, just on the clinical measures, Mark. So you are absolutely right to say population health priorities will differ through each ICB. What we have done is select some that we think are likely to be relevant everywhere. So, for example, blood pressure control. And population health in its broadest sense, the way that you're describing it, that would be tested through the annual ICB capability assessment. So we would be saying, how have you done your joint needs assessment? How do you understand your population health need? What are the priorities? What progress has been made? Because that will be different for each integrated care board. It's also maybe helpful just to say that we've got Duncan and Claire Fuller leading a piece of work with the national clinical directors, with medical directors, chief nurses and others to give us advice on the measures that we've developed and to say how could you make those more clinically relevant and more outcomes focused. We may not be able to change all of them in the first year because we might not collect the data, but we'll create ourselves effectively a list for further development. And then finally, on the research point, yes, it will be in that bucket. We actually have a statutory duty to assess ICBs on research, and we're just looking at whether there's a measure that we could use in the framework as well.
So, Adam, have you got to correct any of that? Is that okay?
That was probably an A+, that's all right. The only key part I would add there, Chair, is I think it's really important just to amplify this is a developmental journey for the service now. So I think there are areas where we have got good data and areas where we need to improve it. And particularly when you look at, for example, the clinical measures, what I'm really struck by has been the level of clinical engagement and excitement to start to look at what are the better integrated measures by which we can therefore measure ourselves more robustly. And so I think what we're trying to do as part of this is to launch it. There will be areas we'll have to tweak. There will be things we won't have right, both in terms of what we're assessing ICBs for, providers, and also how we're working ourselves. But I think if we keep it under regular review, I think the key part, if we can get the right outcomes-based data and we start to measure that in the right way, we can look at the things we need to do for the future, but see the operational benefit in the here and now. And lastly, yes, research and innovation will be tested through that domain as we go through the oversight mechanisms for.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. So, of course.
Just to conclude this bit, I think the next step, which is, as Steve said, the formal consultation, is really important, but it builds on, and I just really want to say, again, it's a big thank you to Adam, to Steve and their teams, 6 months, a year now of co-creation with colleagues across the NHS to get to this stage. Adam, the fact that you are also a jobbing ICB chief executive, has been invaluable. But Steve, the number of people who've been involved in this, because we are trying to do something really quite sophisticated, and it is recognising that we're 2 years on now from the creation of ICBs. The time is right to be clearer about what the role is of ICBs as distinct from providers, but find a way, as you've described through the double lock, that means that actually we're still all aiming for the same set of outcomes, and we don't want to set something up that pulls in different directions. So I do think Adam's right to say, as Steve has said, this is not going to be a we'll consult and suddenly it will be the perfect finished article and nothing will ever change again. But it's a significant move on from where we are at the moment. And the thing for me that has been so encouraging has been the level of engagement in this and people's desire to get something that actually feels like it is the right balance between being, workable, useful, actually measuring the right things that matter, but also the work that colleagues in this organisation have done to really challenge themselves on, as it says here, genuinely, what are the things that then really recognise and reward high performance, as well as the things that are better rehearsed, if I'm honest, sometimes in this forum, about the things that we're doing to support those whose performance is more challenged.
Thank you. Very good. There's one item which is a starred item, just for information only, which you can see, which is a sum of the outcomes and registries directions which were issued to NHS England by the Secretary of State in March 2024. So if we just note those, that would be very helpful. And then lastly, it's any other business. And so is there any other business? I'll just look around the table going left and right. Any other business from anybody going around? In which case, let me call this board meeting to a close, to thank everyone for attending, to thank the executives for the papers, to thank the presenters actually for very good and very clear presentations and good Q&A. Thank you very much. And just to say to the board that the debrief session on the private board and the public board is on the 3rd floor. So thank you very much, everybody.